Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Hello, my name is Tamaribuchi, and it's a great honor to speak with you today. Thank you so much for having me. So today I'll be talking with you about a topic I'm really excited to share with you because I don't think that we talk about visual art and Buddhism that much. And so today I was going to talk about how the combination of Buddhist concepts and making art can be a form of healing. And for me, particularly with attachments and impermanence. I have this really great book to share with you, Believing is Seeing. Mary Ann Staniszewski, she writes about what art is and what it is not, and what it can do. So I highly recommend this book if you're interested in learning more about what art is and the power of visual culture. So I'd say a very basic definition of art is that it is mainly an expression of the artist's ideas and that they're sharing them in a certain way. And they're creating an experience. So many artist ideas are in conversation with ideologies, theories, and values. And so for myself, growing up as a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, those ideas, the Dharma, tends to serve as a basis for the concepts of my work. And I'd say that my art practice, it's not like professional art therapy for myself. If anything, it maybe we could think of it as like self-help, but doing my professional work at the same time, which I guess makes sense in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism when we're trying to apply the Dharma to our everyday life. But for the most part, when I have applied Buddhism in my work, it has helped me make a better sense of the world and my life. And then another topic that I'm interested in is Asian American identity and hybridity. So I tend to share both of these themes in my work. Okay, we're gonna start looking at these drawings that I did 8 years ago when my daughter, she's 11 years old now, but at the time she was 3. And I had a really hard time with her growing up so fast. And of course, we always hear people say, oh, they grow up so fast. But I really didn't fully understand that until it was happening right at home with my daughter Beatrix. So this is an issue with attachment, right? And what really helped me work through this was taking her drawings, which to me, they seem kind of like she was leaving behind these notes of who she was in these different developmental stages. So she'd first start just drawing a line or scribbles, and then it would evolve into circles, and then soon she would try to draw a person. And I was just so fascinated by this. It was sort of like this written record that I could look at. So I began tracing her work into my drawings. And I found this to be this sort of mindfulness exercise where I was taking time to try to understand her at this other level. And I was really, the thing that I found really compelling about it was just how raw and fresh her hand was. And this is a universal experience for all people, but we grow out of it and we lose it and we become attached to, oh, does this look like something, does this actually illustrate something that I'm trying to portray? So I took her drawings and I would trace them using transfer paper multiple times onto the paper. And then I also put in traditional Japanese patterns as well. And so the idea was that I wanted to transcend time and place and connect like our drawing hands together with that of our ancestors onto one sheet of paper. So after a while, she started just getting better at drawing, and soon it didn't make sense to trace them into the work. But I had gotten to a point where I was feeling okay and just letting go of the idea of her growing up. And I ended up moving on to other art projects. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. So 3 years ago was the 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. And at the time, I was seeing a lot of posts on social media about the internment camp experience. And I learned a lot of things that I hadn't known about. And one was the camouflage net factories that were at Santa Anita and Manzanar and Gila River. So I saw these photos that Dorothea Lange had taken of Niseis making these nets in Manzanar, and I was really struck by them because I had this idea in my head that camp labor was not crafting things with your hands. I had this idea that it was mostly farm work and doing jobs around camp to support camp operation. So as an artist, I was just really compelled by this idea that people were actually weaving something. But it sounded like really difficult labor, and people made tens of thousands of nets for the US Army. And they used this hemp material that was very dusty, and so you can see in the photos that people had to wrap their faces in this fabric to protect their breathing and their lungs. And I started watching oral histories on the Densho Digital Repository to get a better sense of what this making experience was like. And I decided that I wanted to try making a camouflage net, but instead I was going to use kimono fabric. And I was thinking that kimono fabric could possibly send a sense of pride of heritage back in time. In the arts, we talk about materiality, and materiality means that the material itself could be imbued with meaning. And with kimono fabric having all these different patterns and motifs, and the minge also of the fabric being made in different ways, in different regions, being dyed and woven or painted or stamped, is really fascinating. And for my family, particularly older Niseis in my family, I know that my Obachan, she had a great sense of shame from the camp experience, so I wanted to send a sense of pride of heritage back in time to her and her friends and family and the rest of our community. Also, at the time, there was the Muslim ban was happening a few years ago. And so when this net was finally installed at the Seattle Center, it's under a walkway, or it was under a walkway. And so my idea was that people would be walking through it, and that the materiality of the camouflage is a filter through which we don't really see people. We see people and objects as blended in with each other. So I was thinking about the net as a metaphor for being interconnected with each other, and just seeing all people as interconnected and interdependent as well. The fabric, I had found old tamono on eBay, so I didn't have to cut up real kimonos. These tamono were so musty and they had lots of moth holes, so I felt okay cutting it. So I showed it a couple more times, and new things were happening in the world. And One of them was children were being separated, incarcerated. They were being separated from their families and incarcerated at the southern border. So I could see parallels between the Japanese American experience with children and these children, children and families, and what was going on with children and families at the southern border. So I had this opportunity to do this window installation, and I had these old stained yukatas from when I was a kid that you could not wear them because they have like teriyaki and like shave ice stains on them that they didn't wash out. So I felt okay cutting those up, and I wove those into the net to signify the children being incarcerated. And I made a video installation for it that superimposed images from the 1940s to images today. And the project started making me thinking more and more beyond myself and our community, and looking at images of camp labor, I started to see a relationship between images of the prison labor industrial complex. And so I superimposed those images. And then the project also was shown again at the Northwest African American Museum and at the Densho dinner. And so this one had a sound installation. And for it, people could listen to oral histories of people making the nets. But then woven into that was the voice of Dennis Bombauer, a half-white, half-Japanese orphan. He was taken out of an orphanage in Los Angeles and incarcerated at Manzanar in the Children's Village.
Did you have any sense of why you were being taken to this place?
None whatsoever. I didn't learn that until later, when we, as small kids, were faced with the American patriotism, which we were brought up, in camp. We were taught the Pledge of Allegiance, and it was about that time, shortly after arriving there, that I realized that I was there because I was part Japanese.
So I was seeing this relationship with the asylum seekers today. And I'd say that this camouflage net project for me has been a practice for me to open up my mind more beyond myself. Growing up in the Buddhist church, I really enjoyed going to the church on the weekends, and it was sort of this like fortress. It was a really safe space, and that is a condition of incarceration. But in the last couple decades, we've been opening up more and more and becoming more engaged in the society around us. So I think that doing projects like this, or thinking more beyond ourselves, we can practice compassion and empathy, and see how we are similar and interconnected. So for that last project, I believe I could have pushed Buddhist themes further in a way, particularly the way I wrote about the work. And then in this project, I began to be more cognizant that I actually was hiding the fact that I was applying spirituality in my work. And at this time, this is 2 years ago, I really was not out about being a Buddhist artist, or that I was using spirituality, and that my ideas were informed by Buddhism. So these images are from 2 years ago. I took them on the Shinkansen, the bullet train, with my iPhone using the panoramic setting. And I could interpret these in a Buddhist perspective. I was letting conditions beyond myself make up the images and capture moving through time and space onto one image. And so when I showed these a couple years after taking them in Seattle, I wrote an artist statement that was pretty coded in Buddhism, and it to me, it sounded like a Buddhist artist was hiding that they were expressing religion in their art. And I noticed that people, generally non-Buddhists, they would read the statement and they didn't catch on to it. They thought it sounded philosophical. But my friend Yvette Tirada was at the show and she was reading the statement and said, "Wow, the Dharma is really strong with this one." And that was just a really different response. And I knew it was because she could recognize what I was saying, what I was writing about. And so then after that, I began to ask myself, why was I being so secretive about this? Where is this coming from? And then I realized, particularly after thinking about this book, Believing is Seeing, that the art world is mainly Eurocentric. And although they've been trying to globalize for the last couple decades, it's still mostly Eurocentric. So on page 42 of Believing and Seeing, Staniszewski writes about the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, and that it's not considered art as we know it today, but as a technology of God. And it was something that was commanded by the papacy. But in the 19th century, as democracy came about, the art world began to shift more and more. And so artists began to make their own work that was expressing their own ideas. And so that really is what we know more as art today. So given this, we can understand why religious art, from this perspective, is passé. Yet the problem is that it operates as cultural erasure for the rest of us who don't have such hang-ups about religion and art because we don't come from this particular cultural background. So it took me a while, even after realizing this, to decide that I needed to say I am a Buddhist artist, because I am so used to trying to operate the way the dominant culture is. But I realized I needed to be more honest with myself, not just for my own sanity and healing in my professional work, but that there's a lot at stake, and I hope the art world does become more globalized. So I myself need to get behind. It's funny how decisions like this will set you up to be prepared for what comes your way. The next year, I was asked by the Seattle Art Museum to be a teaching artist at the reopening of their Seattle Asian Art Museum. It had been closed for several years for an expansion and redisplay of the collection of Asian artifacts, and also contemporary art by Asian artists. So I was really excited and honored to be a part of this event. They asked each artist to respond to a gallery room. All of the galleries had been redisplayed with the intention of not being collections from different Asian countries, but that they were organized by themes. They didn't know I was a Buddhist artist, and they asked me to respond to a room with Buddhist statues. They have 2 rooms with Buddhist statues. One I really like. It has a few magnificent Buddhas with a sound installation of ministers and monks chanting sutras. And along with that, there's a wall tag with the names of the chanters and the sutras. And the other gallery that has Buddhist statues as well as Hindu statues was more on aesthetics, more on the forms of the statues. And there was some writing about mudras and postures and their meanings. But I had a difficult time with one side of the gallery, which features just disembodied heads. And I found that painful to look at. And so that set up the rest of the display to be these forms in boxes that are offered for attentive looking. And that tends to be a more traditional way of display of Buddhist artifacts that I find in Western museums. And I think it's really difficult for the living Dharma to come through in a display like that. And I feel a sense of erasure. But with curating and display, there's always room for discourse. And these conditions set up a possibility to respond and bring out meanings. So I feel very grateful to the Seattle Art Museum for letting me respond from a Buddhist perspective. And I felt like there was some sort of healing we could offer, some way to bring context back into the gallery, and some way to heal ourselves and the Buddhas in the museum. So I first proposed that I was going to bring a statue from home, and I would have museum visitors making these paper flowers and then learning how to make a flower offering to the Buddha. But then I brought Reverend Kusunoki into the picture, and that really opened up our options in the museum. And they began to show us different statues in the museum that we could offer flowers to. Finally, we ended up doing our event with this amazing marble standing Buddha from the late 6th to 7th century in China, which made me wonder how long it had been standing there without a sangha, without people chanting sutras. So people made flowers and learned how to make an offering. And we held a few services, and we chanted sutras, and Reverend Kusunoki spoke about our intentions to awaken all of the Buddhas in the museum. What I found really surprising was that everyone wanted to offer their flowers to the statue. I had this idea that I was going to have a difficult time trying to convince people to do it, but it seemed like most everyone did, and we ran out of room for the flowers. And then what was even more surprising was that people chanted with us. And sometimes they were people who had made flowers and then they came back for the services, or people who just happened to be in that room at the time. They took sutra cards and they just chanted with us, which really blew my mind to what is possible out there. So I think this event, it operated as a kind of healing for myself and our Sangha to be seen and understood by the museum, and for the Buddhas to regain their living context with us.
Awakened one who send us the guidance and teaching. So this statue is a statue form of the Dharma teaching. So these sutras, the written version of the guidance sutras, which we follow. Then the sanghas is the person who appreciates this guidance. So this Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is really important to us. So that's why we say this we call three treasures. I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. We say we always recite three treasures. This is statue is art as well as sacred figure for us. So I truly appreciate Seattle Art Museum to allow us to give this chance to express our respect and appreciation. We are having a service in front of this statue, but we are expressing our appreciation, respect to all the statues in this museum.
I want to end this talk with this last quote from the book, Believing is Seeing. She writes, "If we accept the fact that everything is shaped by culture, we then acknowledge that we create our reality. We therefore contribute to it and can change it. This is an empowering way of living and of seeing ourselves and the world." So I wanted to reflect on this a bit more, because I would like to argue that you all are artists. You are all artists of life as Buddhists. In this quote, it sounds to me like a Buddhist practice, making art as life. Everything is shaped by culture, she writes, and thus in the way we live, everything can be shaped by Buddhist culture. And then we acknowledge that we create our reality. This is a mindset that is created through the application of the Dharma, right? This is an empowering way of living and seeing ourselves in the world. So, as I said, because I think it's funny, when people ask me what I do for a living and I tell them I'm an artist, I tend to hear people say that they could never be an artist, that they're not creative, or, oh, I can't draw, I could never be an artist. But art is an expression of ideas, and it's not just making things, it's not just making objects, it's about making an experience. And I know so many of you make wonderful experiences for everyone. That comes from walking the path of the Dharma. And these are expressions of the teachings. So when you practice the teachings in your everyday life, you're expressing the Dharma into your activities, and you're making a new reality. You're putting out causes and conditions into the world to make it a better place. So I hope we can agree that you all are artists of life, and then we can pay attention to how this expression moves our minds and heals and helps us make better sense of life and what is beyond it. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you today about art and Buddhism and healing. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.